So our guest this morning that's with us is a very special man, not only in my life, but in the life of many. I'm going to invite him to come on as I'm giving you his IMDb page, if you will. So he's a published author. He has one of the books called Sacred Thinking. He has a blog that many of you read excerpts from as I publish them often on our newsletter called The New Thought Evolutionary. He's a renowned speaker in our movement from over the years, as well as he is a vital cog in the wheel in the modern day of metaphysics and was acknowledged so in a recent publication of the history of our movement. He's been a vital piece of the Association of Global New Thought over the years. He has been a lead minister in two, if not three centers, maybe even four across the US, as well as one of the things that I like to call him often is a new thought provocateur. So it's really my honor and privilege to have Dr. Jim with us this morning so that we can engage with him to hear a different perspective on our philosophy and faith and way of life. So Dr. Jim, I invite you to turn your camera on. Let's see if we can.
I don't seem to be able to do that.
You don't, but hold on, I'll get you just 1 second. All right.
Okay.
There we go. So you now have the opportunity to come on.
Okay.
There you go.
Hello.
Imagine me holding the key to that, right? Good. Well, welcome. I don't know that if everyone knows, as I may have said in the beginning, you're joining us from Lyon, France, where you and your beloved wife, Dorianne, moved. And
Yes.
You're having a wonderful life there, I know. So.
Yes, we are. And I'm really happy to be with you and your wonderful community today. Keith, you're a special person in our lives. And I feel like I have a lot of friends there because I've been visited a few times over the years, and it's just wonderful to connect. Even though one of the nice things, I guess, about the coronavirus is we are kind of unlimited in who we can include in our services and celebrations.
That's very true. That's very true. So it certainly catapulted us into a more modern way of doing the work that we do, not only in ministry, but in connecting and supporting others as well. So I'm so happy that we're able to do this today. So Dr. Jim, I'm going to start off with a question for you. I know that you have done a lot of work relative to Carl Jung and his shadow work. And clearly we're at a time of transformation on our planet, and we're experiencing that not only through COVID, but also through the uprising that is taking place with Black Lives Matter, as well as its Pride weekend as well. So the quote that I have from Carl Jung is, "Every transformation demands as its precondition the ending of a world, the collapse of an old philosophy of life." What does that stimulate in you to share with us this morning?
Well, I think we're in one of those times where the pace of change has been getting more and more rapid, and every now and then you have sort of an eruption of circumstances and events and consciousness that leads to a tumultuous way of being. And we're sort of forced out of our comfort zones, if you will, in a big way. And I think that's sort of where we are now. I think Michael Beckwith would call this birthquake, in terms of something new is ready to be born. And the metaphor of the Jung quote is also from, Joseph Campbell addresses that at the time of the Christian holidays is, you can't have a resurrection without a crucifixion, that everything new does require something to die, something to be left behind. And I think we're finding, some really great examples of that, like with the statues that are being removed, not only in the US, but it's happening to some degree in Europe as well. And people saying, oh, no, that's our history, but it's also a history that hasn't honored everyone. And it sort of has reached a point where people have said enough. So that's all sort of this cauldron of excitement and energy and anger and violence and possibility, chaos that we find ourselves in right now.
I love that term, the birthquake, because I can view that on two levels. One is if we use it from the concept of an earthquake, which I know many of us here in Southern California have experienced, you have as well, is that it's the movement of a tectonic plate, right? But
Yeah.
it's not something that it's from the pressure that is built up over a period of time. Right? So it appears that it happens in a moment, but actually that's not the case. It's from the building that has transpired. Also, if you look at it as a birth, from the birthing, for that birth to transpire, there is the 9 months leading up to that of it, that which is being birthed of being in the womb. So what we're experiencing right now is an outpicturing of what has been in the womb, right, of creation.
Yeah.
Um, and birth, in as much, not that I've only experienced one, my own, in the literal sense, but from what I can understand of it is that yes, the ultimate outcome is of beauty, but the process often has some really ugly stuff that goes along with it, right? So that seems to be
Yeah.
happening here as well.
Yeah, the nature of birth is we go through stress. This we grow by means of being stressed, by means of being forced to have new emergences within us, which we don't do from comfort. So, and there's, I like to talk also about the motif of the hero's journey. That idea of you get a calling to move out of your present condition into something. That calling can be voluntary, it can be your idea, but often it's not. It's something that just arises around you, like larger circumstances. So we have 4 or 5 of them going right now on a global level, from climate change to the Black Lives Matter movement and all the connection, all the different kind of tentacles of that, police violence and transformation of government. We have the COVID pandemic, which speaks to not only the virus itself, but also to how we govern and how we provide health care and how we support one another. When the Europeans, my friends in Europe here, are sort of amazed, not sort of, they're kind of shocked that the idea of wearing a mask in the U.S. has become a political statement, whether you wear it or don't, where there isn't that kind of automatic sense of we do it because we want to support one another. And where we are, the curve is way, 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 way down, and from where it was a few months ago. And that's because the French and the Germans and the Italians. The Italians had a horrible situation, but they all kind of got together and agreed that they had to work together, and were emerging from it, at least the first wave. While the U.S. and UK, under very different kinds of leadership, are actually increasing the first wave way beyond what it needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's necessarily a what do you call it, a difficult statement to make, because you can just look at the facts and you see where the curve is going. So how do we look at that as spiritual beings? How do we look at that as people on a spiritual pathway? And what are our responses to it? I think is what we in New Thought are called forward to in this kind of a moment.
Well, not only our responses, but our responsibility.
Yeah.
Right. So once we are truly awakened to the spiritual truth that we're all interconnected, right? How can we hold an understanding of that, of an individual who's being rebellious against the greater good for humanity, while honoring their individuality and honoring at the same time the evolutionary process of humanity itself, and then doing the right thing? Like, can we hold all of those at the same time? Is there anything you can speak to on that?
Well, that's our challenge. And what you're seeing, again, more in the US now than most other places, is this, what I would call a siloing of information and news, where people are able to select where they get their information, and they want to get it from people they agree with. Mm-hmm. So we sort of, the facts that are expressed kind of have to adhere to a certain ideology. And that means we're getting farther and farther apart in our ability to have conversations, because we're starting from different premises and we have different experiences of what is accurate and things like that. Mm-hmm. It comes down to what kind of a society do we want to be? And, it's disheartening in a sense to see all of this conflict yet it's probably a necessary stage in the process of growth that what we in New Thought can bring to it is a consciousness of love and compassion and possibility. As difficult as that can be in certain cases, it's something that we are called to do because we have the tools to do that. So that's what I think our role can be. Those of us who are what I would call spiritual seekers in the New Thought movement is to show up spiritually prepared to take on difficult circumstances and to recognize that people that seem like our enemies are often coming from pain and woundedness.
So that's a really big idea, Dr. Jim. You said that what we're called to do, and we have the tools to do that. We have viewers that are probably not familiar with who and what we are as a philosophy and faith and way of life. Would you be open to sharing what you believe some of those tools are and how we act on those tools or act with them?
Yeah, I think one of the advantages that New Thought has, particularly religious science of the family of New Thought, because we were one of the last ones to emerge, is that we emerged at around the time that Western psychology was being developed. So we have the capacity to include our psychological understanding in what we do. In fact, many of our spiritual technologies, scientific prayer, or what we call spiritual mind treatment, meditation, and other things are based on the recognition that our psychology, yours and mine, our thoughts, our beliefs, our emotions, are what we need to use in order to become spiritually mature and psychologically mature. So most of our technology, sitting and meditating in the morning, doing contemplative work, reading rich literature and books about transformation, taking classes, doing affirmations, visualizations, and things like that are all designed to help bring from within us that potential that we all have to become what I like to call an adult of God rather than a child of God. And when you're able to do that, you're able to show up in a difficult situation and be your best self and not get sucked into the drama and not kind of fall into the trap of seeing the other person as an other, because we believe in oneness. We believe that this separation that we experience is essentially an illusion at the deepest level of our being. And when I'm seeing someone who's on the other side of the ideological spectrum who may be throwing a temper tantrum, there's also an element of me in that person. So if I can respond to them in a way that is compassionate, which doesn't mean always being nice, but it does mean recognizing the connection I have with that person, then the likelihood is that there can be some kind of a way forward forged, because we can't live on this planet separately. There's too many of us. Mm-hmm. So that would be, I would say, the technological aspect of the practices we do in order to, affirm ourselves.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I love the term, as I know others do, adult of God, as opposed to a child of God, which is fantastic. That should be the title of your next book. But it speaks to what I speak to often around, once we become awakened and awakened to our awakening, then we have the responsibility to step into our own evolution, making it a conscious evolution. And that's what you're speaking to. Right. And so I love this quote by Carl Jung, which says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And we in our philosophy and faith and way of life choose to not live from fate, correct? Like we choose to be a conscious participant. What would be three things that you could say from the outside looking in our community and beyond, that we could do to be a part of the evolutionary process on this planet, while at the same time many of us are still in what oftentimes is referred to as lockdown, but let's call it a stay-at-home order?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that I would say in any circumstances is to establish a daily practice, and if you already have one, deepen it, of practice of, say, meditation and prayer and affirmation and visualization and contemplation, where you spend a period of time each day. I think an hour is really good, but it can be less than that. and it can also be split up over the course of the day, where you're focusing on a positive sense of self and a positive sense of what's possible in your life. So that's one. The next thing is, depending on the issue, is get educated. There's lots of information out there that can be helpful. As a straight white male, when I showed up in Fort Lauderdale to start taking classes and become part of that community, where there were about 500 gay and lesbian folks already there, I had a pretty steep learning curve because I had never been exposed to that kind of a culture before in any significant way. In fact, I had been brought up to believe that there was something really wrong with that. But what I was able to do through learning the teaching and meeting the people was to become really connected in that culture, and to find the value in it, and to just fall in love with these people that in other parts of my life, earlier childhood, and what I heard from the older generation was, no, you don't want to do that. But it was just to find that all of a sudden there were this wonderful group of people that were willing to take me in and help me to grow spiritually. So and then I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn about Stonewall. I wanted to learn about the history. I wanted to learn, and now we're seeing the same thing within the racial situation, is learning about things like white fragility, and learning about things like the history of race in America that maybe we weren't quite taught in school, so that we can be better allies, so that we can be better presencing ourselves for people that need our presencing. Same with gender identity and gender fluidity and all the other things that, if you're like me, you never had to look at until you had to look at it. So, and I admit that that's something that throughout my life, I have a lot to atone for. Fortunately, mostly earlier in my life, I think I've grown quite a bit in that area. But get educated. Thank you. But get educated. And the third thing is find what is yours to do, and do that. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to be part of every cause. You'll burn yourself out. So sit and see what resonates with you. Perhaps it's working for peace. Perhaps it's working on climate change. Perhaps it's working on local educational initiatives or something like that. And you maybe do more than one thing, but what some people do is they feel so overwhelmed, they try to do everything and they join every group, and they find that you just wear out. You can't do that. So part of being an adult of God is doing what is yours to do, and trusting that others will pick up the mantle for the other things that aren't yours to do. So those three things: daily practice, get educated, and do what is yours to do.
Wonderful. Thank you. I was smiling during that time because it was bringing me great joy to remember that I played a role in helping you get educated through those times, by spending a lot of fun times with you on the dance floor at Asilomar. So
that's right.
That's what was bringing back joy to me, was us dancing together late into the night at Asilomar. You spoke of atonement, and not that I know that you necessarily need that, but I would like to hear you speak to us in that context of, you at one time were a police officer. You were a man of uniform, and look at the journey that you've been on. So could you enlighten us to what we could possibly do, or any insight into the best way to engage with men in uniform, and I mean men, policemen, not the village people, for the spiritual evolution?
I heard they did away with the police officer, the village people.
Well, they potentially will, yes. But
okay, well, that's another topic, but that's not mine to do.
Well, that's unfortunate, because he would also become the sailor. If you know anything, the history of the village people, one day he was the sailor, next day he was the policeman. But that's another Sunday. So
okay, but both uniforms,
right?
Yeah. Well, I've been having a lot of conversations about this. I was in law enforcement for 24 years, mostly in South Florida, and I was there during the cocaine cowboy thing, and it was the drug running and all of that stuff. So it was a very challenging atmosphere. I was for a while the commander of the police academy for my department, and we trained literally thousands of people. And I will say that, what I see is this: the police are the tip of the spear of a racist system. And it's a system that has grown out of a racist culture that included slavery and then the Jim Crow laws and so forth. And these things are all sort of woven together in the fabric of our society. And it's very difficult to take one thread and pull it out of that weaving and just fix it and put it back and expect all the other threads to be effective. So what I'm saying is what we need to find is ways forward that are systemic in the degree of change. A couple of really interesting, or not interesting, couple of things that really have, I think, led to damaged police relationships, especially with minority communities, is first the war on drugs, which turned, police departments were racist up to that point, but it turned them into occupying forces in minority neighborhoods. And today, in most of particularly the East Coast, big cities, the police departments are largely minority officers. They're mostly, Black and Hispanic officers, and yet they still are acting as occupying forces in some of their own neighborhoods because the system has made everyone the enemy, because everybody that uses drugs is the enemy. And we know it's unevenly enforced. We know that you're better off using drugs being white than you are if you're Black in terms of the criminal justice system. But the effect of the drug war in the militarization of police, in the idea of moving away from any sense of community engagement and involvement, has been huge. And then the next thing that happened in the 80s was the decimation of the mental health system, where mental health treatment kind of, in a large sense, went away. So now you have people that were mentally ill that were living on the streets, that would be engaged in their homes, that were, the police are the ones that have to go, because all of the other social services departments over the years have been shrunken due to budget cuts, and the police budget therefore has grown and grown and grown. So you have police officers handling things that they shouldn't be handling because it's not what they're intended to do. And then the third thing was the mass incarceration system that began in the 1990s through a variety of criminal justice acts and the privatization of corrections, the euphemistically named corrections function. Mm-hmm. So you ended up with a system where people were it was like a factory. And today you have private prisons that can sue the state if they don't have enough prisoners in them. So the idea of serve and protect went away, and it became enforce and arrest. And that's where we are. And that's all built on top of a system that was already essentially racist. Right. So nothing short of systemic change, where the whole governing structure is looked at and that necessary revisions are put into place, are going to make long-term changes. Now, the problem with that is, and I'll end with this, there's 18,000 police departments in the United States. Every one of them, except for the federal agencies, is beholden to a different government, mm-hmm. local, state, county, municipal, town. And we can see with the current state of the federal government, there's not going to be a whole lot of movement there towards systemic change to demilitarization. So that's where we find ourselves. So it's a big hill to climb, but if we don't climb it, we're going to be in trouble for a long time.
Great, thank you. We have a question that one of our congregants asked, which is this: what phrases can you use, meaning one use, with others whose opinions differ from your own, which will not antagonize?
Well, you can always start with "I hear you," or "tell me more about that." Where do you tell me about that? Why do you think that way? Tell me more. I want to understand you. And you may just, quite often what we find is we're hearing whatever the preferred cable channel says, and that can be true on the left or the right. But I just think I think a curiosity and an interest, because what we tend to do, and I tend to do it too, is as soon as you hear what the person says, "Oh, I've heard that 50 times," you shut them down. and maybe add a little identifier of what they are if they think that way. And, it just makes it worse. So I think a sense of curiosity, a sense of, I'd like to hear what you believe. And then I have to sit, I really want to listen and listen deeply, because I do understand where a lot of these beliefs come from that I disagree with. And I can have some empathy for the person, but perhaps, and then I want to see, is there an opening for engagement? If there isn't, I don't need to engage. One of the things I've realized in the last few years, I know very few people that are really hugely influential. Most of the people I know, if I change their mind, it would be one vote. It wouldn't like transform a community or an organization or anything like that. So what I have to say is, why am I so invested in this person changing their mind? And that's got to be my own ego need. So I want to learn. I want to hear what they have to say. And there's a few people in my life that I just don't talk to anymore. Just because to me, that was the most compassionate way to proceed. And for my own to be compassionate to myself. See.
Good. Thank you. We have two more and then we'll wrap up. So there's a quote by Ernest Holmes that's this: unfortunately, we find there is great faith in fear. Faith, he says, is the power of prayer. Now, what is faith? When you analyze faith, you find that it is a mental attitude against which there is no longer any contradiction in the mind that entertains it. Can you speak to us about having faith in fear?
Well, faith to me, faith in anything. Here's how I usually describe faith. When you walk into a room in your home and you flip the light switch and the light comes on, okay, and you're not surprised, that means you had that much faith. In other words, I expected the light switch to come on. So when I do my spiritual practices, if I do a prayer treatment for something, to heal something or whatever, I have faith in it. If when it happens, I'm not surprised. And if it doesn't happen, I am surprised. So if I flip the light switch on and the light didn't come on, I'm surprised, right? That means I have faith in the light switch. But many of us do our spiritual practices and it's the other way around. We're surprised when it does work.
Right.
So faith in fear would mean that I expect my fears to be realized and I'm surprised when they aren't.
Interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. Next question. Is ego a positive or negative to the human condition?
Ego is neutral. Mm-hmm. Okay. Your ego is like if you had a building with girders in it, the steel girders, the ego is like the girders. It holds the building up. You can make that building look like anything. You could make it all glass, mirror, windows. You could have concrete or stucco or wood or any kind of design on it, and the girders will hold it up. So your ego is that part of your psyche, your subconscious, that supports whatever your current beliefs are. If you change your beliefs, your ego supports the new beliefs. So most of us, our beliefs are fear-based. The average beliefs are mostly fear-based. Therefore, the ego is a fear-based ego because it's supporting those beliefs. But if I change those beliefs one at a time to, I would say, love-based belief or empowered beliefs or beliefs in positive expectation, the ego supports that equally. So I think it's a misnomer to say we have to get rid of our ego. If you took the girders out of the building would fall down. So what you want to do is give your ego something good to support. And it accepts whatever you come to believe. Whatever I come to believe about myself, my ego accepts and makes it automatic in my life. So
very, very, very well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our last question is, and the person that asked that question said that your answer was powerfully articulated. I love that. So the last question is this: what is the metaphysical community like in France? Are there any new thought centers?
Oh my, France is the most secular nation on earth. It's very Catholic in culture, but less than 1% of people go to church. Most of the churches, in fact, in France are owned by the government. That's why they exist still. They're supported by taxation for the most part, and the big ones get visited and so forth. Metaphysical community and in spirituality in general, the French are opposed to anything that feels organized, which usually I say to them, you'd love New Thought because we're not very organized. but, you know, because there's a big reject that's still present from the two world wars. Two world wars occurred largely in Europe, and millions of people died. And the God they were praying to did not help them. And the church they were going to colluded with the Nazis. So, plus all the church scandals that have happened and everything. So the French people don't like to talk about spirituality. They consider it a very personal topic. They'll talk about philosophy until the sun comes up in the morning, but they don't talk about religion. We do have the closest center to me is in Geneva, a CSL in Geneva, where I do some work with them. It's 2 hours away by train. And we're actually doing a retreat there the first weekend of October that will be both for in-person and online. That if you check on my blog, you'll see information about that. But, you know, so there are maybe 15 New Thought communities in Europe. They're all very small. A lot of them are expats, you know, people that have moved here from elsewhere. But in France itself, I think there may be a study group, but I've never been able to I've heard there is, but I've never been able to locate them. So not much happening here in an organized way. Deepak Chopra sells a ton of books here. Marianne Williamson sells a ton of books here. The French are avid readers, and you do see a lot of those titles showing up in the bookstores.
Wonderful, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jim. That concludes our Q&A conversation. Not only was this incredibly enlightening and inspirational for me as well, but also educational. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, and I love you all, and I hope to be able to see you in person before too long.
Absolutely. And hopefully if you're up for it, you can stay on, and I'll invite you to do a meditation prayer at the end. Are you up for that?
Sure. Happy to. Sure.
Good. Wonderful. So they're asking if there's any way they can find out more about your blog, and do you have a website? So
I'll put it on the chat.
You'll put all that in the chat. Great. Thank you.